Hi there and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to show you how to use the Mountea Dialogue System that was just released on the Unreal Marketplace. So with no further ado, let's jump into Unreal and let's get started. But before we dive into the settings, let's take a look at what you can expect as the result of this short video.
Hello there. Can you tell me more about this village?
Of course.
That's interesting. What can I do around here?
Well, we have a number of quests available if you're interested. We could use some help with the harvest, or you could go explore the nearby forest and hunt a little.
Thanks for the tips. I hope to see you later.
Okay, that was a short introduction to the dialogue system. It was very basic example, but it's something that you'll be able to create after this video. So let's get started with the actual setup. I expect that you know how to install the plugin and how to enable the plugin in your Unreal Engine project. If you don't, there is a link in the description below that you can follow. It's a short text-based guide of me explaining how to install the plugin and basically do everything that you will see in this video. So with no further ado, let's get started with everything you need to set up before you actually start making the dialogues. First things first, let's go to the project settings and let's scroll way down to the Mountea Dialogue System. There are actually two settings that you can tweak. One is the dialogue system itself, which is the game plugin part, and there is the editor part that allows you to change the visuals of the dialogue system. I will only cover the runtime, the game part, because the editor part doesn't really affect anything except visuals for you. So if you are interested into tweaking the edit part, you can take a look at the documentation that I have attached to the description below. As you can see, the settings are split into two parts. One category is user interface and the other is subtitles. This is to logically split the settings that you will be tweaking, and it should give you a very base idea of what you are doing. These categories are mentioned in the documentation on the GitHub page, and I will quickly go over all of them. So the user interface defines the widget, a base widget class for the dialogue system. By default, it will be empty and there might be nothing loaded here. So first things first, you need to set up this default widget class. So how do you set up the default widget class if nothing shows up? It's actually very simple. Let's go back to the content browser and open the Unreal 5 widget browser here. And first thing first, you need to enable your engine content. As you can see, I got the engine content enabled. The plugins are visible here for you. It's in the settings and show plugin content or show engine content depending on the installation. If you installed the plugin from Marketplace, it should show in the engine content. Otherwise, it will be visible in the plugin content. One way or another, you should see the Mountea Dialogue System content folder either in engine plugins or directly in folder plugins. So let's go here. Let's go open folder VBP, and here you need to select the class, right click, and that's all you have to do. Once you've selected this class, it will load to the memory, and the project settings will now show you this widget class in here. So then you can select it. You don't have to save anything in project settings. Everything saves as you change those values, so don't worry that your progress or changes will be overwritten if your editor crashes or something. Then there is input mode, which currently has no use at all and will be most probably deprecated in future versions. So let's skip this one and let's go to another. There is an update frequency value, and actually, as you can see, here are tooltips, and every single variable has a tooltip explaining what does it do. So update frequency defines how often per second something happens in the widgets. This applies to animations, sliders, basically all the dynamic visuals we can see. For instance, the skip the dialogue, there is an animation which is driven by the tick, but I'm not using ticks at all. I'm using timers, and you need to specify the timer frequency. So this is to avoid ticks, because ticks are not very performance friendly. Then we have a skip fade duration, which defines how quick is fading of each dialogue which is being skipped. It's for visuals only, and I definitely don't recommend setting anything higher than the value that is there already. Then there is something very important, that's the dialogue widget commands. Those are string commands that are passed down to the dialog widget blueprint, and there are switches based on those values. So if you want to create the widget, close, show, update, basically all the basic logic is covered by those events. This way, there is no need to make specific functions, there is no need to make specific classes, and in the widget itself, we only process those events which are being called. These are hard-coded, so if you try to delete them, you cannot. You can add new one, it can be deleted, but those values will remain whatever you do. And that's because those values are required for the C++ part to work. Then we have something very straightforward to explain, and that is to allow subtitles. This settings defines whether the subtitles are being shown at all or not. This is the same thing that is usually set in the game settings, and it can actually be used in the same way. You can bind this value to the game settings, which are being then displayed to the player in the UI. And for last but not least, we have the subtitles settings. There are two ways how to update the subtitles. One, there is the default values, which defines the color and opacity, the font, the offset of the shadow color, and the unique GUID of these subtitle settings. These settings are applied to every single widget which is being shown in the dialog system. So whatever you set here, it will be shown to you once you start the dialog. But if you want to update something, you can do it in the subtitle settings overrides for a specific type of the dialog. So let's say you want a story specific, domain story specific dialog options to be yellow. It's quite simple. You can just need to add a new element, specify the key, which is the row ID and the widget that will be used. I think it's the dialog row. Actually, I'm not 100% sure, so let's go there. And it's actually the dialog option. So let me switch this back. Dialog option. And for the dialog option with ID 0, I will explain how this ID works in a few moments. We can override those settings. So let's say we can set them to bright yellow and use a bold font and, I don't know, slightly smaller size. So if we have, let's put number 12 here for an example. So for dialog option with ID 12, which can be important story, we can then it will be shown in these settings instead of using the default ones. Might sound a little bit confusing to you right now, but don't worry. Once we go to the dialog data, you will understand how these IDs actually work. So I think that is a good way to go to the dialog data right now. There is actually already existing dialog data in the plugin itself. We are actually in the plugin right now. I've shown you how to go there. If you get lost or don't know how to do it, as I said, there is a link in the description where it's all explained. And if you select the content, here are the data, and this is a data table which is using dialog row structure. This row structure is the only supported row structure at this moment. So let's open the data and bring it to the main monitor, and you can see that there are some data already existing for you. So let's select any of those, and I will go quickly over every variable, what is it used for and how does it actually work. It's quite possible that some variables you can see right now are not available in the dialog system that you are using at the moment of this video being recorded. That's because Unreal Engine 5.2 version is still not approved by Epic Games. It takes actually quite some time, more than usual, and I've actually pushed an update to the dialog system which is fixing a lot of bugs and adds some additional functionalities. So if you see any variables that you're not familiar with, don't worry, everything will be clear in hopefully in a few days. So let's get started from the top to down. Compatible tags are a way to distinguish dialog participants. In the current way, how does it work is that you have to specify which participants participate in the dialog, and there is always a specific player node and specific NPC node. This way the dialog knows when to switch to which dialog participant. This system is not very friendly and not very well designed, so in the future releases I will be switching to the gameplay tags approach, where participants will be selected based on the tags assigned to every single row in this data. So if this is a player row, there will be a gameplay tag called player. Otherwise, in this NPC row, there will be NPC gameplay tag. So that's something that will be done in the future. So don't worry about it right now. There is no logic tied to this variable at this moment. Then we have the row type ID, which is the definition of this specific row. As you can see, this row ID, row type ID, is the value that defines what row this is. So let's say if this is very important main story row, we can assign ID of 12. And then by this ID, yes, we are getting to it. It will be, let's go back to the dialog system. It will be parsed by the ID. It will take a look if there is existing settings for the subtitles, and it will override those settings for this specific ID. So this is how it actually works. And in the settings, you have the ability to specify what widget this applies to. In this moment, the dialog system, as it comes from my side, is it only has one type of dialog option. There might be different dialog option widgets. So if you want to apply this ID for only to specific widget, you can specify the class as well. So right now it only supports the one dialog option class, but in the future or in your implementations there might be multiple classes, and you can actually reuse the same ID for multiple classes with different settings overrides. So that explains the dialog option IDs, and let's go and take a look at the other things that we have in here. Let me switch to different row, which actually is using this icon. in the short example that you have seen in the beginning, you could notice that once I selected the end of the dialog, there was the icon. The icon is optional, and in the implementation that you'll receive with this plugin, it will be displayed in the beginning of the dialog row. This way, you can identify unique dialog options like open a shop, and a dialog, etc. Then we have a dialog participant, which is a text variable. It's an optional value. It can be used as a name. Some dialog systems show the name of the speaker before the subtitles. So that's what the dialog participant variable is for. Then there is the row title, which is something very similar, but rather than showing the speaker, it is the selection you do once you're selecting from the options as the player. If I hover over this variable, you can see there is a short example explaining how does it actually work. And using this variable, you can shorten and give idea what the player will tell to the NPCs once this option is selected. Now we are getting to the spicy part of the dialog, which is the dialog row data. Dialog row data is the actual text and the speech that will be displayed and set by the dialog participants. Actually, let me select some, and it has more than one, so you can actually see the multiple usages. Actually, I'm not sure. Oh, here is multiple of them. Let's make it slightly bigger. So now you can see per each dialog row, which is hello, how are you? Then you can have multiple, you can have an answer which says, well, I am great. Then following, but it's raining outside and it ruined my day. So rather than making one huge and long row in the dialog and one really long view, you can split this in multiple lines of the dialog, which will be displayed one after each another. So this way, you can have much more system in the dialog rather than having one big straight line. So what options are here to fill is the row text. It's the text that will be displayed. It can be localized, so I definitely recommend to use string tables for those texts. Then we have the row sound, which is the sound that will be set. It should be the same thing as the row text. It might be different. It's just up to you. There might be no sound at all. Some dialogues are only plain text, no sound. Then there is a row duration mode. This defines how long this row, this text that you can see here, for how long it will be displayed. There are multiple options. Each of them has a short description, but duration. That means it will be visible for the duration of the sound cue. Override, you can specify different time that will be in the override. Then you can add additional time, again in the row duration override. It adds additional time to the duration of the sound cue, or you can use calculate, which calculates it based on the simple formula that 100 characters take 8 seconds to read on screen. I definitely suggest to use either override or add time, because duration of the sound is not a good idea, because the sound is usually faster than the reading. And again, as it is a set of values, you can add as many as you want, and the dialog will show as many of them as you need. So let's close it. Then you have ability to specify additional data. the additional data in the current system and in the future will be a data asset, which will inherit from the C++ class, but there is an option to use this data asset. It can include whatever you want, because you can create a child class of the C++ data asset class and use that data asset as your base class. You can fill whatever you want, and you can pass down this additional data with this dialog row. It can specify at what direction the camera should face, the speed of camera, basically almost everything you can imagine that can be filled as a data there. Then in advanced, you can see that there is a GUID to identify and option to override the settings visuals. I wouldn't recommend doing it here. I would recommend to do it in the project settings, but in some cases you really need to override it, and you cannot specify the ID or the widget, so you can hard override the visuals from here. So this is the dialog data, the data you will see and you actually have seen in the short example. How do you use them? Well, that's another part, and that is the dialog trees that we will take a look at right now. So dialog trees are in folder dialogs in the plugin again. As you can see, I've created a copy already. Please ignore it. There is only the test dialog which comes with the plugin itself. Let me open it and show it here. You can see it has its custom editor. If you select a row, there are some custom details. There are some variables that you can fill. I will quickly go over each of the node type. I will show you how to create new nodes, how to connect them together, and how to chain them to make a logical pacing. So first things first, before we actually go to the creating or updating the dialog tree, let me quickly show you something. If you right click in the content browser, you can see there is a Mountea Dialogue category, and there are three options that you can create. You can create a dialog tree, you can create additional data, or you can create a new decorator. I will cover the decorators in a moment, but let's create a new dialog tree. You don't have to add a new name, you can just open it, and it will open a new window. As you can see, there is already one node existing, and that is the start anchor node from which the dialog will always start unless said otherwise. So how do you actually create the actual dialog? It's actually very simple. Let me show you. There are two ways how to create the node inside the dialog. You can right click and see there is a menu of available nodes, or you can hover over the node, hover over this bottom edge, left click and hold, see there is an arrow, and whenever you release it, the menu pop-ups again. The only difference between those two options is that if you do this arrow thing and select any node, it will be automatically connected. So we have created a lead node. If you don't understand what the lead node is or what the start node is, if you hover over the node, there will be a short description of each node that is in the dialog system. This tooltip is sort of dynamic because you can see that it has a title, lead node, and it says that it inherits graph decorators and it implements no decorators itself. But if you select it, uncheck inherit, you can see that now it says no, it doesn't inherit any decorators. And you can see the icon has changed too. The same thing happens if you add a new decorator. You can see the text is now brighter, so it's visible, and it shows you the number of how many decorators are being implemented by this specific node. So if I delete all of them, it becomes gray and there are none again. But making nodes is not the best part of making this dialog, because you still don't know how to connect the actual dialog data with the node itself. Let me show you. In the menu, you can see there are dialog nodes, those two branch nodes, which is answer node and the lead node. Those have a short descriptions as well, and those two nodes and the complete node can have the dialog data attached to them. And as you can see, there is a data table, and I believe you already know where I'm heading. So let's select dialog. You can see there is a test dialog, and now we can edit the row name. We can select from the rows that are in the test dialog. And as you can see, the preview has been updated to the value which is inside of this selected row. So if I switch to different rows, the texts get updated. And this helps you to navigate to the values, so you don't actually need to open the data table and search for the row. You already know what is inside this specific row you have selected. And you can see if there are multiple dialog row data, it will create multiple of those previews for you. So let me select something that makes more sense. Let me select the generic option, or maybe the player welcome. And now I will create another node, which is answer node. Answer node in this version is the player node, and we will do the same thing that we have done before. We will select the dialog data table. We will select row, and we can see something is happening there. So we have selected a valid data. Selecting valid data is very important, because if the data you have selected are not valid, dialog will, in the best case scenario, won't start. In the worst case scenario, it might even crash the experience. To validate the data, at least on a surface level, you can use the Validate Graph button. If you click on this button, a new window appears, and it will tell you if there are any issues. If you don't understand the issue that you are being shown, you can select this button, Support Discord, and it will open the Support Discord for you. Of course, you can always leave a review, support us on the GitHub sponsors, or just close the window, which is the same as closing the window in here. So actually, let me show you something in this window. So let me clear this data table. You can see invalid data selected. But how can I tell there is no visual representation of this node not having the data table selected? So if I select the Validate Graph button up here, you can see now that there are a list of nodes that show you what exactly is wrong. So the answer node does not contain any dialog data table, no row, and the row, which is, well, not valid right now, is indeed invalid. So let's fix it quickly and see whether those errors disappear. As you can see, there are no errors right now, and we can safely proceed further. If you leave these nodes invalid and you save the dialog, let me actually do it right now. You can see there is a validation issue happening, which shows you the same thing that you have seen if you select the validate graph. Let me use Ctrl Z because it works in the dialog tree as well. And let's use the another button in the ribbon, which is auto arrange. It's an early alpha version, so please, there might take be careful when using this button. There might be some crashes happening, so always save before you use this button. It tries to narrow everything in some visually pleasing ways, but it's just an algorithm. So if you create something very hard to calculate, it might actually crash. But as you can see, for this simple dialog graph, it was working just fine. So in dialogues, there is one very important thing, and that is branching and multiple options. Now, our player with his answer node can only say one thing, but if we copy paste it here and connect the lead node here and select something else like harvest, now in the dialog we will have two options what to answer, and we can proceed further based on any option. But if we don't want to, we can have another NPC row which will do the same thing no matter what you answer. You can use decorators. Don't worry, I will cover them later. To, for instance, here make the player's karma go up, and here make the player's karma go down based on the answer he selects, and then use this information to generate different outputs of this dialogue, of the quest, whatever you are using in the background. But let's say that you don't want to continue, you want to give the player an option to close the dialogue. For that, there is the complete dialogue option. The complete dialogue is a special Tolkien, let's call it Tolkien node. It's the same as the answer node and lead node, but it will close the dialogue when it's finished. So you select dialogue data table, you select the row, player end, and it will play this dialogue data row, and then it will close the dialogue for good. So we have only one last note to show you and explain how it works. Let's imagine that we have created, let's destroy this connection by holding L and left clicking, and let's say that we have created a long, very long branch here of a side quest or talking about not important things, and we want to go back to this lead node up here. Right now, it looks like that we need to close the dialog and start over again. But there is a node for you, which is called return to node. And using this node, you can see there is a preview of some node. And we will use the bubbles you can see next to every single node. If I hover over the lead node, I can see, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there is number 1 in the little bubble. So I select the return to node, and I say I want to select to node 1. And as you can see, it even updated to the lead node. And if I click on it, it focuses on this specific lead node that I've selected. So if I select number 4, okay, it's another lead node. So which one it is? Oh, it's this one. No. I want to go to the number 1. Yes, correct. So using this return to node, you can actually close the blind parts of the dialog and return to the main dialog parts and continue. Now we have created a simple dialog, but we need to show the dialog somehow and let the game play the dialog. So for that, there are 2 components in the dialog plugin, which I'm going to show you right now how to use them and how to attach them. So let's take a look at the blueprints part. In the folder blueprints, in the dialog system folder, you can see there are multiple folders. One is components and other is core. Before we go to the components, let's take a look what's in the core. There are 3 blueprints. One is the player controller, one is the dialog actor, and one is the dialogue character. The dialogue character and dialogue actor are basically the same things. The dialogue actor, this one with the female mannequin, is basically the NPC. It's predefined with all the necessary settings done for you, so all you need to do is to drag and drop the class to the level and use that actor in your scene. The character is the same thing, except it's not for NPC, it's for the player. And lastly, the player controller contains all the defined logic for skipping and all the functions that you need to implement in order to display the UI and all the visuals of the dialogue system. But as I said, there are components that you need to use, and those components are in the folder components. So let's go there. There are two components. One is the dialog manager. If you hover over it, there is a short description, and there is the participant with the description too. The manager is attached to the player controller. The participant is attached to any actor in the level that can be participating in the level. It can be the player, it can be NPC, it can be even a phone, because you can hear voices from the phone. So this way you can all you need to do is attach this participant to any actor in the level, and basically it will make them participating in any upcoming dialogues. So how to use those components? I'm going to show you. I'm not going to create those classes from scratch because you have those base classes in the folder. I'm going to show you what I have done in order to make them work how they are working in the short example I gave you. By the way, you can download the examples level where everything is set up in the very same way. So let's start with the dialog. I've created a child class of the dialog player controller, which is in the plugin folder. And as you can see, there is only little I've done extra. So if you select the dialog manager and scroll down a little, you can see there is multiple events that you can use. And I'm using on dialog manager state changed. And here I'm showing the cursor in the game only if it's active, and if the cursor is shown, I'm setting the game mode to game and UI. Otherwise, I'm setting the game mode to the game mode only, so there is no UI interaction at all. Then I've created a custom input action skip dialog, and I'm calling functions from the parent class. When the pressed, I'm calling pressed event, and when it's released, I'm calling a released event. And that's all you need to set up in this player controller. One extra thing, you might want to set the default widget class. This is very important. It must be selected either here in the dialog manager or in the project settings. If you don't set this widget class anywhere, the dialog system is not going to work at all. So now we have covered the dialog manager. Let's take a look at the NPC. As you can see, I'm using interaction cycles and interaction states. I'm using actually interactable component. That's a component from different plugin that I made for Mountea framework. It's free on the marketplace as well. So I will put a link into the description and you can use the same setup I'm using in here. So once, in this case, some interaction happens, I'm going to initialize the dialog. It's a function from a blueprint function library. If you right click anywhere in the blueprint and type start dialog, you can see the initialize dialog pops out as well. So all you need to do is to select the initialize dialog function. Once the dialog function is selected, you need to fill two variables. First is the initiator. Actually, right now there is no logic tied to the initiator. It just needs to be populated because we are getting the word context from the initiator. So it can be the actor itself, it can be other actor, for instance. If you tie this dialogue to overlap interaction, then you can just read from the actor who overlaps the collision box, etc. The more important thing is the dialogue participant. To fill the dialogue participant, you need to drag and drop this component, the dialogue participant component, and even though it's blue and it requires yellow color or yellowish color, you can connect those two together just like this. This yellowish color represents interfaces, and this whole system works on interfaces. This is to make the code overhead as low as possible. So this component implements this dialog participant interface. So let me delete this function because we don't need this. Now let me recompile. And once we initialize the dialog, we can take a look whether the dialog was initialized. If true, I'm deactivating the interactable. And then once the state of the participant has been changed to enabled, I'm closing the dialog. I'm closing the dialog from here, and it calls to the player controller, to the manager component, which is in the player controller, to hide the dialog system. It's not done automatically because the controller, the component is not supposed to be responsible for anything like this happening in the player controller. The component is there only to give information that some action is required, and then it's up to you to create this logic in blueprints or reuse the main class that I've created for you. So this way you can start the dialog, and this way you can close the dialog. So this was the NPC. Let's take a look at the player itself. The player is very similar to the NPC. It looks very similar, but it has the participant as well. Here, as you can see, there is no dialog graph selected. So there is no need to specify anything because the player is not an active dialog owner. It only participates in other dialogues. And actually, let me explain what those variables are good for. The dialog graph, I think it makes quite sense. You need to select the dialog graph for any dialog participant, for any NPC. You can do it in the class itself, or like here with this female mannequin, you can go to the details, select the dialog participant, and set this dialog to something different. It's up to you to decide. Usually there is one main NPC class, and it shouldn't be set by default in this default class. It should be either based on the subclasses or based on the level instances. So let's go back to the player and let's take a look at the default participant state. The default participant state defines what state the participant will start on once the begin play is called. In the advanced section, you can actually see the current state of the participant. In the begin play, we call set state, and it will set the state from the default state to the current state. This is done in order to prevent some, let's say, unwanted behavior, and you always set only the default state in here, and the participant state is set in runtime. Then we have the third editable thing, variable, which is the audio component identification. It can be either actor tag or name of the component. I'm using this as a name, but you can use gameplay, actor tag as well. If it doesn't find by tag, it will search by name. And this is important because using this identification is going to save the audio component, and this audio component is used for the voices to play them. And actually, let's take a look at the advanced as well. I explained what the state is, I explained what the audio component is. So what is the starting node? The starting node is something that can be updated using the dialog decorators. Because every single dialog graph starts in the start node, but in some cases you don't want to repeat the very top of the dialog. You want to start from different part of the dialog. That is the starting node. You can save any node as a start node, and the dialog will start from that node. Basically replace the start node effectively. And the last thing is the traverse path. Traverse path is a map of all nodes that has been traversed in the dialog. No matter, doesn't matter in what graph. It only understands the unique GUID of the node, and it remembers how many times each node has been traversed through. So using this information, you can update or use a decorator that will enable, for instance, one option only for the first time the dialog starts. So you don't need to repeat every single time the dialog starts a greeting to the player, because the player has already been greeted. You can start with important questions and literally skip parts of the dialog using this traverse path information. So once you have all this information, we can take a look at this NPC in the level and select its dialog participant. As you can see, it's using the test dialog, and by default it's enabled, so the dialog can be triggered. And we are using the NPC audio, which is in here. Very quick and important note on this: if you don't want your audio to start playing in the begin play, you need to set auto activate to false. Otherwise, the audio will start immediately playing. So this is basically all it takes to set up the dialog system. So let me quickly repeat everything. Let's go to the project settings. Let's scroll down to the dialog system and fill the widget class. Let's optionally update the widget command and update the subtitle settings. Then let's create the custom data, which will contain all the dialogues, and let's create the dialog trees, which contain all the logical maps, how the dialogues can follow each other and how they are connected. Once this is done, you need to create the actor or reuse existing one from the plugin and attach according dialog graphs to the NPCs that will be they will be using. And voila, that's all you need to do in order to set up this dialog plugin. I know it sounds super simple, and I know that I missed a lot of niche details about this plugin, like the decorators that I will cover in a future video, or the additional data that I didn't even show you any examples of, but don't worry. In upcoming videos, there is going to be a lot of more information, and if you still don't understand how everything works, you can take a look at the written documentation, link is in the description below, or you can join the Mountea Framework support Discord channel, of course, link in the description below, and I will be here for you to help you with any issues you have with all those components on these systems. So I hope you will be enjoying this system, and let's see you on the Discord or next video. Bye.